waking up every day and having the ability to look yourself in the mirror in the morning and say, it's chaos, but I'm going to make something of today. There's always 50 different reasons why you can't do something, but sometimes you have to kind of pick yourself up and start the next one.
All right, well, welcome to Decision Points, and we're here with David Brisson, the CEO of Austin Pretzel Company. And David, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being a part here.
Sure.
So let's start off with maybe the early years. Where are you from originally?
I was born in Brantford, Ontario, Canada, home of Wayne Gretzky. Like many Canadians, very sad of the occurrences of the Olympics, which doesn't matter because it's not going to air for a while.
So. We're not going to talk about that, but we can go deep into it.
But it's from Brantford, Ontario. That's where I grew up. Kind of been back and forth from the United States for pretty much my whole career, and 30 plus years of travel back and forth. So, I'm one of the few Canadians that spell USA, U-S-E-H. And, I'm very proud to be Canadian, but living here in Dallas and had business connections, here for the last 10 years or so, and finally made the full commitment to be here and relocated my son here. And life is good here on this side of the border. So
along the way, you picked up maybe a skill in a sport that we might be familiar with.
Not hockey, but I did play hockey like every other Canadian. But yeah, I played a little bit of golf in my life. I had a decent junior career and up in Canada and was able to have some success. And that kind of led into some opportunities to come to the U.S. and it never really panned out, but ultimately ended up here playing some professional golf, mini tour golf. And, I owe a lot of my business career to the people I met along the way, early days. From a support perspective, I worked at some very high-end clubs in Toronto, and winter times and off season and things like that, I'd, come to Florida or Arizona, and made the decision to kind of leave my amateur status at a young age at 20 and try to pursue the professional golf route, which, obviously it led to great things in business, but maybe not so much on the course. But it was something that I played a lot of mini tour golf, and a bunch of tour players and things like that were friends and people that I kind of hung out with and things like that. That now later in life they're Masters champions or PGA Tour winners, etc. But my golf career was very much donating to prize funds for better players, and it was a great experience, but you realize really quickly how good all those players are. The guys on TV are really good. There's thousands of other players that, shoot great scores every day. And
sure.
I just, it was something I thought I could do. And I was kind of ignorant to the fact of, my surroundings, and thought, shooting under par could get you places. And it's a lot of donation and time and effort. But ultimately that is, those are the things that kind of define you, and, people that you meet along the way. And that led in kind of a crazy hat business and work with the European Ryder Cup team and all things that we can kind of touch on. But ultimately golf kind of led different directions in my career. And so I have a lot to owe to the game of golf, and I'm blessed to be able to go to Augusta every year and do some stuff around there. And that's kind of a fun one. I've been doing that 20 years now. Coming up on, this will be my 20th year, my 23rd Masters. So,
wow.
Just been around the game my whole life, and a lot of my best friends are guys that have been in golf, and a lot of my best investors and business people are guys that I've met through golf also. So,
sure. Yeah. So I want to talk about several things today. Maybe the touch point, the beginning point would be the connections that you made through golf, some of the things you learned through golf. I know that as a professional sport, golf is just de facto the most competitive, because there are fewer people around the world that are able to compete in a professional setting in golf than any other professional sport. So it's more difficult to be a professional golfer than it is to be a professional football player than a basketball player. Do you feel like that hyper competitiveness is something that you bring with you to your other endeavors?
Yeah, I think, well, on the first half, or I guess the first part of that question, it's never been more competitive than it is today. When I was trying to play golf, which again, I say trying, there was mini tours and they were playing for decent amount of money that you could probably live in one geographical location and be able to kind of scrape by as a young 20-year-old. I think now if you look at the game, it's 3 to 4 years to get on the PGA Tour. The costs are the same, regardless of what tour you're on. If you're on the PGA Tour, the Korn Ferry Tour, or, PGA America or European Tour, the costs are very similar. You still have to get on an airplane, you still have to travel, you still have to pay for a caddy. So I think more so now than ever, it's been extremely hard. And then, they keep limiting spots. And so it's a little different, when 20 years ago or 25 years ago, where, you could go to a Monday qualifier, and then if you didn't have that, you'd have a Hooters Tour event or a Gateway Tour event to go play, and you could actually make a living that week by traveling to the event, trying to get in. But, mini tours is really where I cut my teeth and all that stuff, and there was no real glory out of that. But, you get to go play good golf courses because you're good at golf, and business guys like that. And at that time, I hit it really far, and that kind of, was kind of cool to some people. And but most of the guys at that point, didn't know the difference of a PGA Tour player and a mini tour player. There was a huge difference on paper and everything like that. But, if you're a 12 handicap and you see someone that can shoot 3-4 under par, that's impressive to people. So sure. That led to just a lot of opportunities and, mentorship that I was able to kind of get, and access to great golf courses. And, it kind of just led me down this path of opportunity. But the biggest thing that really came out of being around the golf world, I guess, in my early 20s was, I started making headwear for a bunch of PGA Tour players. And, early 2000s, there was not a lot of innovation in headwear. It was like you got your Titleist hat, your Ping hat, Callaway hat, etc. And, you kind of went, you wore it, the rep gave it to you. It was really at that point where I saw there were some opportunities, companies like Titleist, and there was mergers like Cleveland and Strixon, and I saw an opportunity to kind of co-brand hats. And by no stretch am I taking any credit for the hats that are on the PGA Tour today and co-branded, but, one of the first orders they ever put together was the Titleist FootJoy on the left and right of a head on a hat, and with the Titleist logo on the front. So I did that business for a long time, and ultimately, ended up exiting that business and handing it over to someone else because I thought the grass is greener on the other side. You hang around with wealthy people at country clubs, and, you have this niche little business, but it's growing, and you're making, millions of hats per year. And you think, well, geez, they're driving, XYZ car, and they belong to this club, and they have a house in XYZ place. And, these guys must be making millions upon millions. And, if I knew now what I, or whatever the saying is. But, looking back, that business was very lucrative. I had to get 5 or 6 orders a year. It wasn't a whole lot of work. I was still in the golf world. We were taking orders from agents and people like that for their tour players. And then we were getting their retail business to kind of mock some of the stuff on tour. So, the KPMG hat with Phil was kind of iconic. New Era ended up taking that one over longer term, but early days, that was one of the prototypes we did. Freddie Couples with the Echo on the brim was one of the ones that we kind of prototyped and, continued on. Ernie Els with the SAP and Echo, that was another one. And he had TaylorMade on the side, Titleist on the side over the years. So, that was kind of just a total fluke one that kind of fell into my lap at the time, and was able to build kind of a niche sports business. And that led into X Games and all kinds of wild and wonderful things inside of the headwear world that led us into, the sports world with Team Europe and some of the apparel and some of those things. But ultimately, you look at opportunities, and if you have a network of people and you have trust in yourself, you can essentially go out and, build a business from really nothing. And that's really what happened. One of my first businesses, it really was, I knew a couple of guys on tour.
Sure.
I had access through friends and family or people that we just knew. And, I said, well, we should be trying to do this. That led into some Scotty Cameron headwear, which for 20 years I had garbage bags of prototype hats that I didn't know what to do with, and ultimately got rid of, which 7 years later, I ultimately regret. But, because those were prototype 101s, but I actually ended up giving the title as Canada, and I don't know how they display them, but I heard it's pretty cool. But, it's just taking opportunities and running with them and having the trust to go back to people that you met along the way and ask them for help, because sometimes you may have an idea that you may think is crazy and they go, absolutely, I'm in, or I know someone that can help you, or we can support you financially or whatever. So meeting people everywhere you go and asking their names and asking for their contacts, don't be shy away from that stuff, would be one of the pieces of advice I give anyone young trying to get into entrepreneurship. But it's led me down several different paths business-wise that
Sure.
I never thought I'd be. So,
well, so like, there probably was a point during your playing career where you made the decision to go into the headwear business more in depth, and in the headwear business there was a point, it sounds like, where you thought that now it's time to exit and go into another venture. I mean, what do those times feel like for you? How do you notice those?
I think for me it was more, you get older, you realize that the wear and tear on your body would travel. People move on. So people that you're doing business with, or especially in the golf world, guys don't hold a card, they move on, they become club pros. For me, it was, I was fortunate enough that I kind of had a hybrid of both. I was able to work at, a few exclusive golf clubs in Toronto. In the summer times, I would come home, I saw my friends, family, then I was able to kind of go and do other things and try to play a little bit of golf. And so I kind of had a little bit of balance, but ultimately I think I realized quickly, which I'm not going to even call a playing career, you made reference to that, but I think I learned quickly that, these guys are really good and I'm not that good. And I started to kind of look outside the box at what I could do by utilizing some of those opportunities. And, for me, it was just, continuing to kind of look at what I was passionate about and things that interested me and try to make those and turn those into a business. So
walk us through from that point to Austin Pretzels.
Well, we have a few years to go through, but I think you asked the question of, like, at what point do you kind of realize, this isn't maybe what you want to be doing long term? I think for me, we built a sports marketing business. We were licensing stuff with IMG. I had a team of people. We got into the banners and tents and headwear, and we were partners with Club Love, which just sold a Titleist a few months ago, or maybe a year ago. But ultimately, I think it was just, I knew there was more out there than just being in Canada as a distributor for some of these American brands, doing the headwear stuff that I kind of owned, and, looking outside the box of what we could do being young guys. And, I ended up hiring a few friends and some people to kind of stabilize some of the other pieces of the business. But I think looking at that and the innovation opportunities kept coming up at the time. And, we had a very successful business that should have lived on to today. Mm-hmm. And we kind of just took the easy money, and, knowing about EBITDA and return on investment and what investors are looking for, we had all those pieces at this, at that time. And it just didn't feel like we were relevant, or, I don't know what I was looking for at the time, but it was the right time to kind of hand that to, oddly enough, our manufacturer, who to this day still does it. And I think they do like 11 million hats a year in the business. And so every hat you see at PGA Superstore or Second Swing or Dick's, Golf Galaxy, all those hats are still, I believe, still made through them. So again, not knowing anything at that time, it just felt like the right thing to do. You have friends that graduate from college, because I wasn't, I was playing golf before a lot of people graduate. So they graduate, they go out in the business world, they may go work for a bank, they may go work for, a sports marketing company that's bigger. And it always feels like, when you're at the Best Western and they're at the Four Seasons at a tour event, that, man, it must be nicer on the other side. and, spending time in Wales, in Usk, Wales for the Ryder Cup in 2010, all the sports marketing guys that we were doing business with had, the black car service or Range Rovers in the UK. And, we're in a little, I think it was a Ford Fiesta, and I'm 6'6" and not a small human. So, and there was 3 other people in that car. So, you just kind of realize that maybe there's other things I should be doing, or my path maybe not is that. And, I was able to kind of carve out, once we sold that, I had a non-compete in the sports marketing world. I was like, well, what am I going to do now? So, of course, I went back to, I'm going to go maybe do something in golf. And one of our guys I was close with was like, you should join a group called the Eden Club in St. Andrews. And they have reciprocation at different golf clubs all over the world. I don't know if they're still around, but, they had Petormy Castle in Scotland, and it was kind of like, well, I'm going to go play golf at all these good golf courses. I'm going to meet all these guys that belong to 5 or 6 different clubs, and I'm going to meet as many people as I can during this time. And essentially went out and did that and started that. And, one of the spin-offs of the sports marketing business is we had a digital signage business inside of that. We ended up selling off that. So I had non-compete in the marketing world. I had non-compete in the sports world. So the natural fit was just to go find people I could play golf with and try to check off as many boxes of the top 100 as I could. And was able to check a lot of boxes.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah. Which is also, 15 years later is also a deterrent, because when you've played some of these golf courses, motivation to go play different golf courses is kind of not at the highest.
Kind of low. That's right. Yeah, sure. I can imagine. If you talked about the challenges, I mean, it sounds to me like you are driven and you pursue things with a great determination. What are some of the challenges that you face when you start something new?
Being self-confident, I think, is the hardest thing. I think the word entrepreneur or entrepreneurial, is very glorified. I think corporations wanted entrepreneurial people culturally 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. I don't think people realize what an entrepreneur is. I think it's a misused word. And I think it's one of those things that to wake up every day and do, in my own reflection of looking at like my career, it's the last thing I would want for my kids. I think it's hard. I think people realize that, an entrepreneur isn't someone that goes and works at Morgan Stanley for 25 years and, has kind of his basis set and the home paid and the second home and, all the nice things, and their kids in private school. Then they go, I'm a serial entrepreneur. And those people do exist, but it doesn't make them bad people or anything like that. It's just the true entrepreneurs are waking up every day with, the fear of God in them.
Right.
And they're going to go and win the day. And I think the hardest thing, and I touched on corporations, they want entrepreneurs inside their corporations. True entrepreneurs don't fit into those boxes. And I think waking up every day and having the ability to, look yourself in the mirror in the morning and say, I'm going to go do it. It's chaos, but I'm going to make something of today. And, I've been able to do that. I've found niches by building my own businesses, and I've been able to support, growth companies, other entrepreneurs that didn't know how to put together an investment deck, didn't know how to raise capital, didn't know how to introduce them to people. And I think a lot of those things, there's a lot of really smart people that can go and build businesses, but you have to have all the tools. And I think entrepreneurs, they have a lot of the toolboxes to succeed. And, failure, it is real. And I think if you're talking to a real entrepreneur, you'll hear that there's failure in their voice and what they've done. And they learn by it. They know not to make it on the next time or the next company or the next project they're working on, where I think the world just kind of glorified entrepreneurs at least 20 years ago as, they don't really understand, business or things like that. And I think the world's been made up of entrepreneurs, both small and large, if that's manufacturing and having a small mechanic shop or, building a tech company or a solutions company, I think, all different skill sets, do work, but you have to really believe in yourself. You have to, understand failure on a daily basis. Not every day is, you have a support team around you like a corporation or, a big company. So when you do fail, you have to kind of get up the next morning and fix it.
Sure.
So I think that's kind of, in a nutshell, how you have to kind of look at the day.
Do you have any examples of failure that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, of course. I think it's exciting. Like, I think the hardest thing in entrepreneurship is, you get the order, you get excited about the order, and you ultimately have to go execute it. And, sometimes execution doesn't go as great as you think it's going to go. And, the ability to adapt to that failure, or, losing an order because, you just didn't succeed, or there was XYZ factors, there's several occasions. Like, we talked a little bit about the headwear business, embroidery,
right?
Like raised embroidery, different things like that. It's not where the location they wanted, stuff like that. I always refer to people, 2010 Ryder Cup in Wales, IMG ultimately had the licensing for the merchandise tent. What rained Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We were probably 30% of that merchandise inside of that tent. And I was on a Friday meeting, and they're looking at their numbers going, we physically can't put enough people through to actually sell all this merchandise. We're going to lose millions of dollars.
Oh, wow.
And, we didn't make any mistakes. We showed up, we had our teams in place.
Right.
But at the end of the day, there's no mathematical way that they're going to sell all these SKUs, and fingers are being pointed.
Yes.
Right. And, there was many mistakes that week. And if you recall, like Team USA, I believe Davis Love had I think he was maybe he was not a captain, but assistant captain, but they embroidered on all their rain gear, big USA, and the players' names like basketball jerseys.
Yes.
Well, cloth on Gore-Tex material, it bleeds through. So all their white shirts are bleeding through. And, so early on the week, we were able to help them with some rain suits and stuff like that. But, it's sometimes in these big or bigger deals, you physically have to go through and, just kind of take those lumps. And, it didn't affect us at all, but ultimately we're being blamed for it. Thankfully, the Monday finish helped them, and I think there was about 9% left of inventory. So that's just one example. Obviously, it wasn't a direct one, but it's just an example of,
sure,
forecasting gone wrong and weather kind of playing a factor to it. For me, I've started some businesses that just did not work. There was times that I thought maybe it's the tech sector, maybe it's a solutions company. We had a digital signage company that was kind of ahead of its time, and we probably exited too early. I say exit, like we handed the business over to someone else to go execute our problems.
Sure.
But ultimately, it's finding the right rhythm and the right fit for your own personality and your own needs and your own wants. And, you're going to try a bunch of things, and some of them just aren't going to work.
Sure.
And, I've had 4 or 5 of those businesses, and, some other ones that we've gotten to, the finish line and just weren't able to capitalize it. Or, there was factors like COVID, or factors like downturns in the market, or, there's always 50 different reasons why you can't do something, but sometimes they're just outside your control, and you have to kind of pick yourself up and start the next one.
Sure. So you maybe seize on a little bit of that competitiveness that you come by naturally through your background.
Yes.
From golf, the headwear business, and then these other businesses where you've said that you get different stages of success, and move. You obviously see things that maybe others don't in business opportunities. What do those look like?
Well, it's one of the things. It's definitely not a superpower. It's more trial and error.
I doubt that.
Yeah. But no, I've always had the ability to connect people. I've always been able to, you have a problem, I can probably find someone that can help you. And sometimes they don't work and sometimes they do work and sometimes the people don't jive. But yeah, I've always had kind of forward outlook, I guess would be the term, or, the ability to kind of see where things can go. We touched a little bit on the sports business and the non-compete and all that stuff, but I joined Wheels Up in their early days. I was in Canada. There's a whole bunch of rules around travel, but I was, knew some of the co-founders of the business, and they're like, "You'd be perfect."
Mm-hmm.
While being Canadian has its own factors, doing business in the U.S., and then trying to get airplanes to travel from Canada to Canada. But, I was able to help them connect them to some of their capital needs, through some Canadians. I saw, so that was, I'm going to go corporate David now. I'm going to be, living in New York and putting a suit on every day. And you realize quickly, like, that's not who I am. And, yes, I was there, I was at the table, but, they had all this hyper growth and they hit a wall too. But being able to connect people and seeing, what could be done with the right introduction. And that's kind of, leading up to kind of 2012, that's kind of where I felt I had a really strong niche in the market. I come from a family of bankers. My dad was with TD for almost 40 years. My mom, by extension, was with TD for almost 40 years as we got transferred around. That was the thing to do back in the day, but she was always employed by TD. And my sister kind of was a teller at 16, and she's running private wealth for one of the big five up there. So I've been around bankers my whole life. So I'm like, corporate Dave's going to go work at Wheels Up and it's going to be great. And I realized about 6 months into that, this is probably not going to work for me. And I have a Rolodex of people and a bunch of people that come to me for advice. And they're asking me, how do I kind of put this together or that together? Maybe I need to kind of, sit in the strategy side of private equity. How can I connect people, not go raise the capital, but you have a problem, I have a solution. I can sit with your family office and we can kind of go through what your needs and wants are on opportunistic deals, and let me see if I can go find someone for you, or a deal for you, or this for you. So I kind of sat in this no man's land of, private equity for the last 12, 13 years and kind of looked at opportunistic deals and how I could connect people, and didn't look as like connection. It was like, I'm creating a solution for you. On, the family office or athlete side of my network, it was really, how can we, capitalize on the name and likeness or the family's name as a lead check? Or how can we take this, steel factory and build it into something that's unique, but utilizing that family's name, So we did some real estate stuff that was kind of, ahead of its time in the Canadian world. So we took some like tire factories and some old steel factories and turned them into big Internet of Things facilities for tech companies. With Google's head, international office being in Waterloo, Canada, we're able to kind of innovate and create a bunch of spiral for startups out of those facilities. And but I think like the forward-looking strategy side of the business is kind of where I've held, but been able to step in and support an entrepreneur behind the scenes, not necessarily be my own leader per se, but put people into the deal and help them with the capital side. I think that was really where the niche was on that side, because you had a very brilliant tech mind, but didn't know how to talk to an investor, didn't know how to put together a forecast that, didn't look like a hockey stick, which every single one did.
Of course.
And even Americans understand that hockey stick reference. So
That's the last weekend.
Yes. Well, now it's
That's
like,
right.
Yeah, it's a red, white, and blue hockey stick for the rest of our lives.
That's right.
But no, it's the art of the deal, right? It's not always having the best company. It's not always having the best product. It's about having, the right pieces of the puzzle, the right connections, the right way to scale, the capital to scale, all those things. So how that led to Austin Pretzel, I have no idea. If you would have said I'd be called Pretzels moving forward in my life, I would have laughed. But that's my new name, and that's kind of, how I got here was kind of running this strategy and being on cap tables just by helping and supporting companies, if that's medical device companies or, pretzel companies or,
Sure.
Golf courses or things like that. I've kind of Swiss Army knife a little.
I definitely want to talk about pretzels.
Yeah.
But you mentioned sort of connecting people and that kind of thing, and knowing the way to present things to different investors. What do you find maybe most challenging? Is it finding the capital for the idea, or is it finding the growth that attracts the capital? I mean, what would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question. I think there will always be capital available, which people are going to go, really? There will always be capital available. It's what you do with that capital. I think so many people look at the capital and they're just not good stewards of capital. I think giving people the guidance to the first time you land your $1 million check, don't renovate your office. Right. You don't need a new car. Just keep going. Sure. And I think what happens a lot in the younger generation, and it's you want to have the shiny things and you want to have the hype because we live in a world of social media and all these things. And there is some merit to some of those things, but I've heard people talk about, I placed $1 million check and next thing you know, they're, at this event or that event in the UK or Europe or, New York or LA. And I think just giving them the guidance to be good stewards of capital is one of the biggest things that anytime I support a company, make good decisions with that capital, because a lot of people, and I say there is access to money, people will give you money. They know that not every deal that they invest in is going to succeed. They understand that there is risk associated with giving you capital. But as long as you can wake up in the morning and say, I was a good steward of capital, I did everything I can, I fought for my investors, I think that's what a lot of people are looking for. So I think the personality and, just reassuring them that you're going to make good decisions is one of the biggest things that I try to tell people. And, it's not going to hire. If you're an engineer and you code 40, 60 hours and run your other business or run the business, another 40, 60 hours, you have to continue to do both.
Right.
It's not go hire 10 engineers. If you're building a, factory or a solutions business or whatever business you're building, you still have to put in the work.
Sure.
You still have to put in the hours. And I think what kind of fascinates me, I guess, in this new generation of investment and people taking on growth capital is the amount of people that come into the business once there's capital available without the revenue. So one of the things I've tried to beat into people is, keep doing exactly what you're doing. And when there's an opportunity and you need to put a body in place, go put that body in place, but don't go put 10 people before the capital's there, the growth is there. And unfortunately, it just happens so quickly. And, being on the other side of things now and seeing deals, where I'm going into a business and I'm just sort of restructuring it. You see all these bodies and you're just trying to equate what everyone does, and it's delegation across the board and delegation of capital in my mind. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It's very helpful. And I think, would you say that that your approach to sort of responsible use of capital is, in addition to building a business, you're building a reputation, and your reputation is you're gonna fight for your investor. You're gonna fight for that investment to be successful, but realizing that the business world is not a sure thing.
Absolutely.
But that it sounds like that your thought process is that success can come from hard work and not necessarily from building the bells and whistles that some do.
I see more companies fail that are capitalized than the ones that are undercapitalized. I think you see a a lot of businesses that have access to capital, you see it a lot in Silicon Valley and, Texas and Austin, sorry, not Texas, but, you see a lot of companies that get a lot of capital, and 2 years later, you're going, what happened to that company? And I think, knowing when to raise capital is a key thing. But I think a lot of people, if there's access to capital, they're going to take it.
Right.
And we live in a society today that, cash is king and it's expensive to do business. But sometimes you have to bootstrap it. Even if you're on hyper growth, you have to bootstrap it. And if you have good rapport with your investors, if someone's writing you a $250,000 check, they probably have another 100 or 200,000 to give you if you do, right by them. I'm not saying all,
Right.
but a lot of the time, if people aren't risking 25% of their wealth, on a venture deal or a growth deal. So
Right.
if you go out there and you actually execute, there's probably an introduction from that investor. There's probably a recap, as you kind of grow, or they'll open up their own network. So that leads to 5, 10, 15 other investors. And, it just kind of spirals. If you do what you say you're going to do and you're honest with the capital and your capital partners, then it can lead down different roads. But to go, capitalize a business and spend it all, then go back to your investors, it's hard. And you see a lot of businesses that are overcapped that do fail because there's a ton of delegation and a ton of just, meetings to have meetings.
Sure. Well, so I want to make sure that we discuss sort of the your transition into Austin Pretzel.
Yep.
I've been very interested in our conversation,
Yes.
but I'm hyper interested in any caramel dipped pretzel that you
It's toffee.
your toffee, yes,
Toffee, caramel,
yes,
yeah.
because that might be my downfall. So,
Wow. It's
how did you get there? This is not something that you were like doing in your kitchen, or somebody was doing that.
Chef David and I, and no. No, it was a deal that the original recipe started a gift basket business. It was kind of an auxiliary product that they added into gift baskets. We were essentially, they were manufacturing for us. They had one single SKU. We kind of gave them, well, there could be something more to this business. And we essentially were co-packing. We came up with the Austin brand. Our intention was to move to Austin, Texas, and build this big multinational pretzel company. No, we consolidated the business and ended up buying our co-man and relocating to Dallas. And the success of the business is the product. It's the rock star of the show. Nothing I did was going to change that other than put a lot of the pieces together. But it was a deal that was, we have 48 hours. We need to kind of buy this company and we need to buy this gentleman out. And, it was a call to someone that I've done business with for a few years. And I said, sight unseen, I need a couple $100,000.
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal? And he's expecting tech, anything other than pretzels. And I said, pretzels. And he goes, the things you eat? And I said, yes. Just trust me on it. I think we're close to like 7-Eleven and Costco. I think these guys, and I was on the cap table prior. And he's like, okay, well, if you like it, I like it. So he wired his money. And a week later, I said, I need more money. And he said, how much? I said, I don't know. But we just got 7-Eleven and we have a Costco opportunity for road shows. So that was really the start of the business. And, that was mid-2024. And, we've expanded our SKUs to almost 12 SKUs now with Holiday. We're in HEB launching March 1st. We have 10,000 points of distribution for our retailers. We're in Target regionally, 7-Eleven regionally. We're in 7-Eleven nationally in Canada. It's just been this wild, crazy ride. And, we have a facility now that we manufacture everything in-house in Texas. And it's never in my wildest dreams would I thought pretzels would be where we go, but they are delicious. They are very addicting. We have an empty bag guarantee on the back, which everyone kind of laughs. And, we're a pretzel company with an identity crisis because we're not a pretzel and we're not a candy. So it's, they're very good and they're very delicious. And, we've had to capitalize a few times just in our short little lifespan because, we are on the big growth trajectory, and, you have to make good decisions, all those things that I kind of talked about. And I'm learning an industry from scratch. I've done a lot in my career. We played in the beer business for a while in Canada, in the craft beer world, and that's nothing like the grocer or consumer goods area. But it's been a fun little ride, and every day I kind of continue to wake up and not sure what I'm going to walk into in a manufacturing factory because that's new. But
that's the thing I wanted to ask you about. So your story begins to kind of not repeat, but it's got a common theme that there is no competition that you're afraid to enter. I did a little research before you came in today, and the most competitive aisle in any supermarket is the salty, sweet snack. And so you do both in...
Yeah, why not, right?
And
it's... why not play the best with all the multi-billion-dollar CPG companies? Why not? I walk into Target and I literally sit there and laugh because we are center stage, middle aisle, at least a few of them in Texas here. And I look to my left, and I look to my right, and I go, what company doesn't fit in this aisle? But there we are. So it speaks volume to the product. It's, we fight every day for shelf space, but we've kind of been able to do it in an untraditional way. And, we have a bunch of good mentors and people around us that come from the CPG world that I've kind of leaned on, and they've kind of given us the advice, to keep going. But yeah, again, it's sort of, I look around at where we're competing and who we're competing against. It's me. But at the same time, the product's really good. And, I've been able to navigate this world because I don't really understand it. There's still times that none of it makes sense to me. Bill backs and some of the stuff. I'm like, so we got that many orders, but we owe them this. It's just a different industry on that side.
Sure.
But at the same time, yeah, I kind of took this one head on. Definitely never thought I'd be referred to as Pretzels and as my new name. And nor would I ever, in my wildest dreams, think that I'd get up at 6 a.m. and drive to a pretzel factory. But here we are.
Well, so along those lines, I mean, you're clearly the right person in terms of the vision, the drive, the lack of fear of competition. But just as important as the growth component, the capital component, it has to be the people component. So how important is it to have the right team, the right people doing these functions for you?
Yeah, culture is everything. And I've literally, food is a whole other animal. It's, or, snacks, whatever we want to call it. But it's, you have to have the right people. You have to have the right culture. You have to make people, tick every day. It's easy for me to motivate myself, but at the same time, you have to go in there and motivate others around you. And I think, we've been able to, we've had some turnover, but at the same time, it's like, sometimes hyper growth companies aren't for everyone. Mm-hmm. If you would have said a food business is mostly tech, meaning it's analytics and data, it's 90% of the job, which, from the outside looking in, I would never have thought, it's all computer work and data. You go get the sale, you walk in the store, you go pack it. It's not the case. It's who's good on a computer, who outweighs each other. There's a lot more to that, but it starts with the data work and your analyst work just on the computer. So, but no, having good people is everything, and having good investors and all those things that we touched on. I went to a lot of my close investors that have 5-10 people that they syndicate through, and I kind of brought them all into this deal. So it's all on me now. We have to win. So that's what makes me motivated, is the challenge. For the first time, it's like, it's personality forward. You are the brand. I kind of had to own the fact that my new name is Pretzels.
Sure.
I played golf the other day with someone, and, they handed me a hat that had a pretzel on it. I was like, great, I'm going to wear this hat. But, it's, the snacks world is it's uber competitive. The pretzel world is uber competitive. You know, I think it's like 60 or 70% of all the, well, it's more than that, but 60, 70% of the pretzels come out of Pennsylvania, you know, the manufacturer.
Right.
Of that. So people have seen that as opportunities to consolidate, but it's a lot of old German families that, you know, make pretzels.
Sure.
And they make a lot of pretzels every year, and they're all within an hour of each other. Hershey's done a great job of consolidating pretzel companies. So consolidation happens every day in pretzels and snacks. Even the small companies, private equity has gotten into the CPG game in a big way. And you're seeing, you know, billion-dollar acquisitions. Like, you know, a friend of mine who was at Lesser Evil, you know, they went from $30 million to $250 million and were taken out for all in $1.2 billion. You know, local story here, Poppy is, you know, another one that's went crazy, and they were, you know, 2 billion plus. And they had investors on their cap table that still thought it was Mother's, right? A few of them are on our cap table.
Yeah.
They got a big check and they were like, wow, this is interesting. I thought this company doesn't exist anymore, which always fascinates me on the other side of the table. But no, it's all about just growing and doing the right thing and just being consistent. That's another thing, is just being consistent with who you are and what your brand is. So
The what is there, or was there a time where this felt heavy, difficult, like a hard lift?
pretzels.
Yes.
Every day.
Every day.
I walk in the office not knowing. It's not like the other business where I know I can connect you, or like there's no one I can call, right? Like I'm on an island most days, and you know, I have people now that we can call, but there was times that, like, as you're trying to grow and, you know, personality clashes with, you know, people that our investors have certain expectations. The way that we were growing is, you know, we're on this trajectory. We're going to be bought for $100 million, $200, $300, $400 million within 2 years. Maybe at times we were like, yeah, this could actually go that fast.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we'll break every record. We are better and bigger and faster than everyone else. And then you realize, like, you come back down to earth and it's like, well, this didn't happen and this didn't happen. And this line was down for 2 months and you missed your numbers, and you ship product to Canada because you're Canadian and tariffs affected that, and Canadians stopped buying American products and it all got shipped back. And then you're like looking at all the product going, what am I going to do with this? But yeah, every day I wake up and I'm not sure, like, it's not like anything else I've done in my life, which I think motivates me to learn.
Sure.
It motivates me to tap my network, to ask questions. And I think I ask a lot of really dumb questions to really smart people from this space. Because I don't really, still, every day I learn something. And I think that's something that I go to bed at night thinking, like, this was an interesting day and I learned this. And, you know, hopefully I can continue to build off that. And, but no, every day is a challenge, you know?
Sure.
Trying to find POs in some of these distributors' back-end systems when someone's sick. That was my morning.
Well,
Logging on to a computer to find a PO. But it's nothing's easy. So,
well, let me ask you, you mentioned a little bit about, you know, what maybe some discussions were about the best case scenario. If we were having the same conversation 5 years from now, what would you tell me is happened or happening or going to happen?
5 years from now, I hope we can look back and say, I did everything that I learned along the way, I executed within our own business, and we were able to exit properly. You know, I think the big shiny object, private equity is looking for that. You know, they'll get you for 5X, grow, put capital in, and 5X it themselves, or strategic capital. I hope that we're able to look back in 5 years and say, we're able to execute on everything we said that we were going to do. You know, the product evolved, and, you know, we were in line with what consumer needs were. And, you know, we did everything and our investors are happy. And, you know, when I asked them for money and, you know, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and you guys, you know, if we hit this order, it's going to turn into this evaluation. I hope that we can look back and that all those metrics that, you know, through my learning curve that we hit, and ultimately, I think we do have the right fit to be, one of these national stories, but at the same time, we're really at day one. So early stage, but I think we have a ton of opportunity.
I would agree. So, David, it's been great having you as a part of Decision Points. Fascinating story. And if you sell to no one but me, you're going to be successful. I promise you, because I love your product.
Well, the good news is you're not alone. There's lots of people. I get lots of fan mail on our website. So people do love our product, and go out and try it. It's good.
Well, thank you for being here, and best of luck.
Thank you.
You bet.